with awe and wonder. I'm coming into the space with awe and wonder, and I recognized in my body and in preparing for today that I'm coming into this space with some unhealed trauma. I had a recent experience with a news outlet that was the trigger of that trauma. Um, in short, I felt that this outlet reduced me and our organization New to a single story. In fact, the story, as it was about a woman from Ypsilanti fighting systemic oppression. That was the clickbait that was used on Facebook that, as I'll tell you in a moment, spurred some of the worst responses I've ever seen in my life. What that single story did, though, was it failed to mention who I am, that I am the leader of an organization that for 30 years has done really important work, not just because I'm here, but because of the tremendous amount of people on our team and in our network, including many of you. The single story missed what I stand for. I stand for liberation. I stand for justice. I stand for freedom for Black and brown-bodied people. I felt like my personhood and my organization were distilled into words that fit an uninformed trope at best, but made me the target of white supremacist vitriol for clickbait. I felt used and disappointed. That single story is contrary to how my mom and daddy raised me, who they told me I was, how I've lived my life, the work I do, and the work that we do at New. And we're going to talk about narrative today, not just about poor journalism, although surely this was poor journalism, but about the way that media and journalism and narrative reinforced racism and the forces of oppression, particularly for Black and brown-bodied people. The way that narrative, particularly mainstream narrative, reinforces bias and upholds racist tropes. Over the years, there have been lots of attempts that I'm aware of in the Black community to reclaim or to create our narrative. I grew up on Jet Magazine and Essence and Ebony, and I frequently watch BET, and Oprah, oh my, Oprah was my hero. I wanted to be like her. I wanted to be that Black woman. In this moment, when we're trying to radically imagine a new way of being, a new future, I'm curious, I'm holding the questions of what does it mean to reclaim, or as my brother Orlando said, to create, to be the authors and curators of our own truths. Deeper questions I'm holding include what does it mean to own our narrative when white media tries to erase us? What does reclamation look like when we have been pushed into they, the other, when we are shrunk? What will restore us? So frequently writing paints Black and brown folks as a monolith, and I want the freedom to move through the world in the fullness of who I am, in the dynamism and in the multifaceted and multi-layered person I am. I believe and have seen that at the center of every great movement in the history of the world is the fundamental question, who do I belong to? Do you see me? Where are my people? And when I was feeling a little lost, triggered and activated, I turned to three people who I love and who I admire: Orlando Bailey, Leslue McGraw, and Alex Thomas. Orlando I turn to because I can always trust him for truth, and he has been an ambassador and a champion for Detroit in particular, but for us, for as long as I have known him. I'm excited for him to introduce himself. Leslue McGraw, I fell into her arms the day this article came out, and she affirmed what I was feeling and confirmed what I knew to be true. And Alex Thomas, a writer, communicator extraordinaire, has been pushing new narratives into our mouths and our hearts and our online spaces in his work, and really been a champion in Willow Run and in Ypsilanti, and for those for whom they could succumb to that single story. So I'm so grateful that y'all are here. I'm gonna own that energetically, I'm feeling the weight of this conversation, and I'm feeling the sanctity and the safety of holding this conversation with you all. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Yodit. And we're gonna open up this conversation by asking each of our speakers, what communities and identities are you drawing upon as you enter the sacred space of this conversation? And Orlando said that he doesn't get nervous to speak, so I'm gonna pop to Orlando first.
Oh man, good afternoon, everybody. I'm honored to share this space with so many amazing folks. I honor the leadership of Yodit Mesvin Johnson, who is nothing short of my auntie, my big cousin, my mentor, my friend and sister. I draw from that. I draw from the community of family. My family is filled with griots. It's filled with storytellers who oftentimes lacked or did not have the platform to tell their stories their way, who did not have the opportunity to tell a story for the public record, especially when it comes to affirming how we show up today by telling us stories of our history. And so being a recipient of the wisdom of my 80-year-old grandmother who is still living, who is still jazzy, who is still vibrant, being the recipient of her sisters, my great aunts, amazing Black women, along with my mother, who made up the village that raised me, and being the recipient of the community that is the city of Detroit. I had family, but I had an extended family and Detroit neighbors who created this village that raised me. And so I'm drawing from that. I'm drawing from those stories. I'm drawing from those experiences that are legitimate, that often are not told, but working to, and forever working to create those platforms for Black folks especially to tell their stories, express their power, and to be honored for their expertise.
Thank you, Orlando. Leslue, can we jump over to you? Would you like to share? Oh, you're muted. There we go.
Hello, can you hear me okay? Okay. So the communities from which I draw, I feel like there's two buckets. So there's the one, my everyday buckets of communities, which is as a mother of an adult son and a precocious 5-year-old at the same time. And as an active member of our family, and also as a business owner of a social media business and former journalist. So those are, some of the communities that from which I feel affinity with and represent, and women, especially women entrepreneurs, which has its own set of issues, in this area. But when I think about my narrative and where that comes from, I also draw from communities that are so much bigger than me. I'm often asked to speak on behalf of, the last 400 people 400 Black people. So I think about that and showing up as honestly and as authentically and as helpful as I can, but knowing that I'm still just one person. Also the community of family who has well, two families. My mom and dad's family both have been in this country for a really long time. With my mother's side, we can easily go back to the early 1800s, but have have hints that there was family here as early as 1617. And, and feeling and learning in the last 6 years really about that part of the family and some of the things that have been brought through the family, things that didn't make sense to me. And also on my dad's side, having part of the family who's very proud of the part Irish heritage, and spending a lot of time rebuking that, and now feeling like, okay, we can all exist in this one Leslue and find out how to show up for that, because I don't know the first thing about Ireland. But just so I just feel like I'm, those are the communities which I draw from. I want to honor all of those as I live, and that's what I try to do, best of my ability.
Thank you, Leslue. It's such an honor to have all of you here. Alex, would you like to share?
Sure, certainly, and thank you so much. Thank all the panelists. Yodit, I just love hearing you say anything about me. Orlando, Leslue, it's such an honor to be on a panel with you. Ananya, it's just recently met you, but you always invite us to come to this in a spiritual way, and I just really appreciate that. So thank all of you. To that spiritual point, I'm really feeling, and how I come here is feeling the spirit of both my grandfathers were UAW people. Both my parents retired from the UAW, from the Willow Run bomber site, which was followed by 2 factories that they retired from. That's so central to our area's story. And from the founding of Ypsilanti, I'm feeling that spirit of all the working class people and that liberation struggle that's just central to this area. And that story, it begins, you go the early 1800s, the federal government decides to put a railway from Chicago to Detroit, where it crosses the Huron River. It instantly becomes a place of speculation. That's where French speculators put up right at Forest Avenue and Huron River Drive. That's where Ypsilanti City is founded. Just so happens to be just west of the Canadian border. So it's a great place if you're on the Underground Railroad. So it's a great area here. We were a central spot on that Underground Railroad where people seeking freedom and creating one of the most vibrant African-American communities in the country, certainly in Michigan. We're here in Ypsilanti beginning then. We go speed it up later on, the early 1900s. There's a tributary off the Huron River called Willow Run, goes out into a huge field, which is an awesome place for the biggest factory in the world, which where Henry Ford, virulent racist that he was, got the Eagle Cross, the highest civilian army from the highest civilian medal from the Nazi Party was given to Henry Ford, which gives you an idea about his perspective. But he created the largest factory in the world that became a key component of the arsenal of democracy, rose to the river to fame. Also recruited working class whites from Kentucky, blacks from all over the South, which came and populated this area. That's where Ypsilanti Township starts to exceed the city, and where we're 56,000 now to the city's 21,000 population. But it's all central to this local story of working class people that were confronting the power structure and cutting out a space for themselves, creating a story. It's a rich history. And just, I wanted to get some points in because I see so many familiar faces and loved ones in this Zoom. And just following that story and that history will lead you to so much of the root of these systematic problems in this area that we all want to address. So thank you so much, Yodit, and New, everyone that's here. It's just a great opportunity, and appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex. And the question we want to ask you all next, it came up sort of toward the end of our planning, but it felt really central to having this conversation. We wanted to ask you each what drew you to storytelling and narrative. And just as you feel called to share, what drew you to this work that you're doing? In Orlando, you had shared a really beautiful story in our planning. So if you would like to share first.
Sure, I'm always trying to yield space. And then the name is like, no, get in there. Yeah, for me, it was, growing up in the family that I grew up in. We are generations in now here in the city of Detroit. My great-grandparents came here from Comita, Mississippi, in Sharkey County. That's the Delta, like down in the Delta in Mississippi. I don't call it the Great Migration. I call it, them fleeing, really hard and Jim Crow racism, and purchased a home in Jefferson Chalmers, a home that is still owned by our family to this day. Purchased that home in 1940s. And, for me, it is, being in a family full of charismatic people, amazing storytellers that can paint pictures so vividly, as if you are there, like you can see it, you can live it. My grandmother being one of the most skilled, and not always being the most eloquent, not always conjugating that verb correctly, speaking with our Black dialect, traditionally, a way of interacting and speaking that's not always palatable for white digestion. And so we have this narrative that goes around in our community around, the Black and excellent and the talented 10th. And I can tell you that the talented 10 and the Black and excellent didn't look a whole lot like my family, right? But my family is excellent and my family is talented. And I wanted to legitimize that voice, which is also the voice of so many Detroiters, right? Legitimize those stories while also leaving people with their dignity and pride. I'm not going to let folks embarrass themselves when they talk to me. I work for Bridge Detroit. We are a journalism and engagement organization. I'm going to be very careful and make sure that I clarify. Are you sure you want to say this? This is what I'm hearing. Am I hearing it correctly? Creating these, relationships that aren't transactional, right? So we have major dailies in the city of Detroit that, give you your everyday news, like clockwork. We're able to tell stories and we're able to honor Detroiters in our storytelling. So for us, it's not about churning out stories and news so quickly, rather than spending time honoring and uplifting the voices and the perspectives of Detroiters, like my family. So that's what really drew me. I wanted to see us represented in a more just and equitable way. And so that's my mission. And it transcends personal and professional life. Yeah.
I think for me, the storytelling just was natural. It was listening to him about his grandmother. My grandmother was the best storyteller as well. She just passed away last year at 89 and a third. And even the last thing that, I saw her when she went on the ambulance stretcher, and I said, "Love you." She said, "Me too." Like, I love me too. Like, she's such a mess, like even to the last bit. And so I prefer to sit with her and listen to stories. So when I was growing up, it was common to you didn't get in grown folk conversation, is the way that it was expressed. But I found that out that if you were quiet and they forgot you were there, keys to the kingdom. So I learned a whole bunch. I learned the who was with who, who shot John. And I would pretend like I was coloring or whatever else, and I'd have all the scoop. So from, yes, someone said, yes, all the tea. Yes, I got all the tea from Tennessee, and up here and all the way, all the parts in between. And so very recently, like in the last 6 years, I've expanded that understanding of how important this is to our family, that what I was getting from my grandmother and my great aunts and my older cousins and uncles was just a little smidgen of the greatness that we had. You know, I can only imagine in Africa how we might have showed out. But I can say from Tennessee to Ann Arbor, we've been in Ann Arbor since 1942. And so I would say that poetry, writing, and connecting to community have been things that have, and family, have been things that have helped me through the different events in my life. And so at different ages, it looks different. So when I was 9 years old, it was a matter of going to a white school and being used to a Black school, and everything is different, you know, and people needing to touch you and touch your hair and touch you all the time, like, you know, just do stuff, and not really able to express myself. So I took to writing, and I found out that you could kill somebody in a story and it's completely legal, right? And so so people got, they didn't really get killed, but you know, like I might have something happen to them or whatever. These stories that I would make, I have these bound stories from 3rd through 6th grade, and my little innocent classmates don't know that there's some of those people. And so at different areas. And on Monday, I forgot, between the talks that we've had in the planning and a session that I went to for Ida B. Wells, Ida B. the Queen. It's a new book that just came out, that's written by her great granddaughter. It clicked for me because she said that Ida B. Wells, who you might know is an anti-lynching activist and suffragette, and the co-founder of the NAACP and journalist, she said that she was constantly writing herself back in history. This constant erasure. They came out with the top 100 influential Black people. She wouldn't make that list. She was like me. Like I've been a journalist off and on for 20 years, but it's always been a side gig. So she would never make the journalist list. Like, you know, like, so I was like, you know, it just clicked for me that that's my new path, is writing myself back into my own narrative.
That's beautiful, Leslue, and I hope you caught everyone laughing and smiling along with you. Alex, go ahead.
You know, when I think about stories, I'm in the home that I grew up in now, and my room that I grew up in, it borders my next door neighbor's driveway, which his car, whenever I smell Hennessy and lemons, I think of my next door neighbor that since passed away. That driveway was the social gathering spot for the most hilarious group of retired auto workers that I grew up around. And with my room right there, you know, my bedtime, I said I had a Leave It to Beaver upbringing, so I was in bed like at 8:30. But you know, things would just get cooking next door, and I'd hear the most entertaining stories about you know, retaliating for racism in the plant with an incident with the foreman. just this, it's difficult because the language is so colorful and the topics were so not wait for a forum like this. But what listening to those stories growing up, it gave me the voice that I have now, and that perspective, and looking at the power structure, questioning it, asking, why things are the way they are, and making demands. Just those people that I listened to growing up, they were some of the first people to enter the plant that was Willow Run, two automobile factories that had just been integrated. When Henry Ford opened them up, he didn't want any African Americans in those plants. He thought that all the Blacks should work in the River Rouge plant because it was a better environment for them, and he wanted it all white. Here at the Willow Run Bomber plant, it was through union organizing from that previous long-standing Black community that was in Ipsy City, and also the UAW that integrated that plant and helped populate this community with the African Americans you see now. And those stories that I heard, and that spirit, that's what I picked up listening to growing up, and why those stories are so important, and that authentic story of this area is so important to me. And that's what I see the void in from growing up in this area and seeing that loss of media, and seeing that story that was there before. There's a void there, and it's filled by people in their own individual disparate media sources. And in that, these systems that we're all in, that delusion that there's a particular gender or ethnicity that has more value than others, that just gives more way for that to have room. And I want to break that up. And we need that authentic story of this area, of all those people that contributed and why things are the way they are. We need that to do that. So that's what I'm thinking of here.
Thank you, Alex. And that's a really wonderful place to transition into the core of this conversation, which is really about how your experiences as storytellers is shaping your visions of a just and thriving society. And at this point, I think we'll open up the space for you all to riff off of each other, or just whoever feels moved to speak. Go ahead.
Well, one of the key, I don't even know who first said it or how it was, we kind of hit the same spot, whereas in order to speak about centering justice, we also have to include in that conversation centering truth. And
that was you. That was you. That was nobody.
You were there with the snaps. I mean,
not for yourself, okay?
but so much of our truths have been hidden, or they've either been hidden, or we didn't know at all, or they've been so related to trauma that they haven't been shared. So I found out a friend of mine, Sharon Newman, who's a Jewish woman of a certain age in this area. She was saying that she learned more from learning through the genealogy about what happened in the Holocaust than from her own parents who lived it. And I completely understood that, because that's how it is in our family. Like, certain things you just don't talk about. And in that process of keeping out hurt or pain or trauma, you also are losing the truth. And then it doesn't help that, we can't look to Hollywood or media or textbooks or anything either. So when my family, the reason that we came from Tennessee is because I had a great grand uncle who was a voter voting activist and member of the NAACP. And he was kidnapped from his home and mutilated and killed and put in the Hatchie River. And then there was part of a whole campaign, a terror campaign that went down. And so my grandmother was just 9 years old. So that was a lot. And she had to move up here with her grandparents, and the rest of the family later came up. Well, until 6 years ago, when the case was revisited and the unredacted FBI files were obtained by a white investigative reporter, nobody talked about it. I knew because my grandmother and I were like besties, and she had shared it with me, but she also told me, like, don't bring it up again. And so when that came out and I started sharing it with family, like, I never knew that. And then so I have cousins that are going to their mothers or grandmothers and they're saying, oh yeah, you know, that happened, but we don't talk about that. And so as if over the course of the last 5 years of my grandmother's life, I got to hear stories, good stories about Tennessee that were linked to the time around the lynching, but she had just put all of the good along with the bad. All of it was locked in a box, if that makes sense. I don't know. I don't want to get too far in a tangent, but I just see I missed something. Somebody said something.
No, it's okay. There's lots of beautiful comments. Orlando or Alex, what's coming up for you? This idea of we can't center justice without centering the truth. What's been your truth?
Well, you know, I had some thoughts, and then I was just really listening to Leslue, and it kind of transitioned. It made me just think about community trauma and individual trauma, because I think like a lot of people on the Zoom are really concerned with some of the same areas I am in the county, those most vulnerable. And there's such a history of economic trauma, of trauma from being excluded from the story consistently, of trauma from outreach that, you know, just in name only, and expectations being set so high. So, I mean, out of that experience, there's a lot of suspicion. And there's lots of ways to re-trigger if someone is not very sincere and wants to engage that community. And being sincere means listening, asking how to help, things like that, and before giving direction. So that's and understanding that when you're dealing with that, you know, that collective trauma in a community, that's what you have to do. Listening. You have to listen on an individual level, and that's some of the work that I've been just privileged to do. And it's interesting to use that word privilege within COVID, but you know, being an advocate with the resources available, it's really given me an opportunity to have a front row seat and distributing aid and understanding those individual stories. And you run to a lot of traumatized individuals that just need someone to listen to them, hear their story. You know, that's so key, you know, because there's so many just anonymous voices that aren't heard. So, you know, that's been my experience on the individual level. And I just, since we're here in this forum and so many want to, are really sincere and passionate about addressing those communities that have been traumatized. You know, it gives you a perspective. I hope to listen and better execute your efforts, because we know you want to.
If I could offer something. Oh, Yodi, I'm sorry, did I cut you off? Okay, just to build off of that trauma, I came home from college to a bankrupt Detroit in 2012, right? So we can talk about the trauma, that economic trauma. We could talk about the trauma that comes along with, you know, a state-sanctioned emergency management that Detroit was under. The loss, the progression of loss of democratic power in the city of Detroit. through this lens of working in community development, the nonprofit sector, I began to interrogate and ask the question around why the external narrative of the city of Detroit that was being cascaded to the world blamed Black folks for what was going on in the city of Detroit at that time, while I was working in predominantly Black neighborhoods with Black folks who were committed and who were hell-bent on making sure that their communities continue to have a quality of life and to thrive. And then we saw the election of a white mayor and began to see this national narrative shift to rebirth, to comeback city, to rejuvenation, to revitalization, with a face that didn't look like the people that I was working with on the ground every single day. It was personified through the person of a white millennial face, right? White millennials who I ain't seen on the east side walking the streets. I know Miss Barb Martin, who bought up all the locks on her block and was continuing to keep them cut. She was a retired opera singer and librarian. I knew about Brenda Butler in the Chandler Park neighborhood, who worked and advocated to make sure that Chandler Park, the neighborhood and the actual park, got the resources it needed to continue to be a beacon for that community. What I saw was a deficit-based framing nationally and even locally of Black folks and their experiences without recognizing the trauma, without recognizing the trauma that comes along with the losing of democratic power, without recognizing the trauma of being a part of a city that once had resources and seeing it deteriorate and go away. This was what I was hearing, and those were the stories that were not being told. So even before I was a professional journalist working for a professional organization, I still had to amplify and uplift these stories. I still needed to start from a place of not deficit, but asset, right? UDM talks about asset-based community development. I took that in, and we're starting from assets. Who are the assets? The Black folks. The Black folks who continue to work, who continue to make sure that their neighborhoods thrive. The Black folks who continue to step in and fulfill the role of government where government was unable and had no capacity, and that story wasn't being told. So I started a podcast. I'm like, well, I'm gonna, try to even this out just a little bit. I started a podcast, Authentically Detroit, with Donna Givens. And to my surprise, because we didn't know what the heck we were doing, it's become a thing, right? I'll leave it there. It's become a thing. And we talk to folks on the ground. We talk to folks in power structures. We talk to all kinds of folks. Everybody wants to come on and talk to us about what's happening and what they're doing and how the work is shaping the future. And so I recognize that narrative is a tenet of power, and power is beholden unto itself. It doesn't want to give up anything. So we decided to just take it.
Come on now.
Own it.
When you said, that's perfect. I'm sorry.
Go for it.
Oh no, I just this asset base, I just love that. Right. Yeah.
It resonates with me too, Orlando. And Janae is gonna jump through the Zoom. She just feeling you so much. I can see her, and I'm feeling your energy, Janae. I had a similar experience when we were designing the Champions for Change program, and frankly, Centering Justice. But we do a virtual journey of Washtenaw County because erasure is real. And Alex started to uplift some of the truths of Ypsilanti that get buried in this deficit narrative about Ypsilanti. Little did that news outlet know that I was proud. They said I was from Ypsi, but I'm just more than that. I'm really from Detroit. I live in Ypsi. And when you grow up in a blackety black city where you are always affirmed, when I got here to this desert of whiteness in Washtenaw County, I couldn't wait to find us, right? And I couldn't wait to find our stories. And the truth is that through the help of a lot of folks, the African American Cultural and History Museum, shout out to Bev Willis, Deborah Meadows, Joetta Mile, so many people that helped us. Matt Countryman, who's the Dean of Africana Studies at U of M, we were able to do a place-based kind of presencing about Black and Brown leadership, particularly Black leadership here. You know, the fact that on the west side of Ann Arbor, where the new center is, where our building is, was a predominantly and vibrant Black community when I got here in the 90s, and it has been virtually erased and renamed, just like what we saw in Detroit, Orlando. This renaming of neighborhoods is a way of erasing our history. And the really powerful thing about the position of Black folks, they were all over this county, but on the west side, was that they'd been pushed there because of there was a high water table and the taxes were low. But what happens is, as you described, we take shit and turn it into sugar, right? So suddenly you have this vibrant Black business ecosystem surrounding. Now everybody loves, and I love, I am also in love with the folks at Zingerman's and the contributions they've made to our community. But while we were on that walk, Lori Saginaw brought to our attention that the building that the deli is in had once been owned by Black folks, right? That those houses that now sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars, people lost because the taxes went up and they couldn't sustain them, right? So I'm just resonating with what you're saying, Orlando. And a final point, being from Detroit and working there during the economic downturn, like you, I saw us really threading and weaving together so many, there were so many stories of how we put a safety net together. Importantly, $1 trillion in economic activity that was happening in what would be known as the underground economy. While you are talking about a bankrupt city, Black folks in Detroit are doing hair and nails and cooking food and doing jitneys before there was Lyft or whatever that Uber, right? Like, and those stories are so important. And when you reframe them the way that you talked about, you rob the people who stayed, the 700,000 people who stayed in the city when everyone turned against it, you rob them of their truth and their humanity.
Exactly. Thank you. I want to, I feel moved. I'm like conflicted, right? Because I feel like I need to rep for Ann Arbor and the Black people in Ann Arbor, but I want to start with this idea of the narrative and it being like just kind of being shaped haphazardly or maybe not being influenced, and versus what was intentional. And maybe that doesn't matter, but I just want to say that I think that sometimes it is intentional because it pushes against white comfort, right? So I don't think it's always about I'm going to do this to oppress, but it's more about white comfort. To create a narrative around Ann Arbor that is like the university was like the best thing that ever has happened to Ann Arbor, and it carries the whole narrative of everyone, and that Black people were saved and brought up here from the South and put into the Old West Side. It's a narrative that kind of promotes white identity and importance and devalues ours. So like she said, I was like clicking because I love our history, and the first settlers, the first Black settlers in Ann Arbor date back to the 1830s, the first homeowners in Ann Arbor. It wasn't until, like she said, until there was a need to kind of annex Black people in Ann Arbor that we kind of pushed to the Old West Side. And then when they were tired of us, we filled a need. And they were tired of us, then they broke that up with higher taxes, and after we made something out of it. And so the Black Old Business District and all of that, when I would talk about that at different times that it's come up, it's hard to have a conversation about this is a Black area when now it carries the names of all these white people that carry some sort of memory and good feeling for white people now. They feel like you're erasing them. So what do you think? I mean, this is for anybody. Like, I wonder, like, how do we move past that? Like, I can still have my narrative and I don't need to erase yours, but I don't want to be erased either. I think that's what we're grading against.
I think if I could, Leslue, you're doing a great job giving us that story and telling that as in many spaces as you can. I on the eastern part here of the county, that particular story that's been erased. If people Google West Willow 48198, you'll see a triangle that's between Michigan Ave and I-94 that comprises the West Willow neighborhood. It was built for the white administrative workers of that Willow Run plant and the factories that came after. It was all white until 1964 in the Civil Rights Act that outlawed segregation in housing. But back when it was previous to West Willow, when that plant was being populated, no one in Ypsi Community Schools wanted Blacks from all over the South, their children, or whites from Kentucky in their school district. So the Willow Run School District was created out of that system of oppression and that racist structure that existed then. And through that desegregation, that activist effort that I mentioned earlier with the previous Black population and the union organizing that integrated that, also that advocacy helped a group of, it helped create some public housing that was integrated. So people didn't have to live in shanties that in those groups, those Blacks from the South and whites from Kentucky. It created some public housing, but also in that advocacy, it helped organize them to buy some land where they could get a spot on the Willow Run School Board. Because previous to that, that group was in public housing and didn't own any land and didn't have any voice on the Willow Run School. So that's that authentic local story of how these systems of oppression and have helped get us where we are right now. And Leslue sharing her part about Ann Arbor and that history, I think, and what I shared with the eastern part, and just those authentic stories in history that we don't know, that people need to understand. We didn't arrive here in a vacuum. It was, things are executing exactly as planned, and we need to recognize that if we're really going to address them.
Before we transition, can I acknowledge something? I spoke in error about the Zingerman's buildings ownership. What was the learning was more about their position within the Black community, right, during the existence. So just want to clarify that. Thank you.
I just wanted to acknowledge Janae's comment, especially around the Indigenous First Nation history that is often erased. I think that white dominant narrative, it feels threatened when Black folks demand, or Indigenous folks demand equity, feel threatened of erasure. And I don't think I don't think it has to be that way. Equity and amplification does not mean oppression to you, right? And I think we've been holding, that tension, right? And it is something to really hold and reckon with, because the cultural anxiety is palpable on the pavements of these streets, on the pavements of neighborhoods, especially, in the city of Detroit. I don't think it is a narrative that is in spite of, but it's in addition to, right? When we talk about erasure, our narratives have been left out and locked out of the public record, right? And we have newspapers that are now publicly apologizing to marginalized communities for their hand in that. And I don't think the request is to come and take over all the narrative. It's just let that narrative be told, right? And so when somebody said this to me and it really resonated, when you start talking about fairness and when you start talking about equity for marginalized groups, the group at the top of the caste system is going to feel threatened and oppressed because they're not used to that fairness and that equity. And I think we have to, continue to push back. I think we have to continue not only to push back, but to push up, push up these narratives, as Yodit said, that have been underground, right? The markets, the exchange, the economy that is underground is also worth telling. Quick story, there's this big push for folks in the city of Detroit to enroll in Detroit at Work and get all this kind of training and stuff to get certified to do all kinds of labor jobs, right? And they're having trouble. This is just from being on the ground. They're having trouble feeling some of these apprenticeships and stuff like that. And the Black folks that I talk to, who I know are talented, who I know are already up in people's houses fixing stuff without bonding or without insurance or certification, is saying to me that the cost of going legit is too tremendous and detrimental to my livelihood and my being. And so that's just like
But every time we call out racism, they start a jobs program. Can we just say that? Come on.
If you listen to Mike Duggan's State of the City last night, jobs is what's gonna fix Detroit.
No, the water is sick and we keep treating the fish, okay?
It's the jobs. It's the jobs. Let Mike Duggan it's the jobs. And what's going to fix neighborhood is big industry like Amazon and FCA. That's going to fix neighborhood.
It all revolves around, like you said, deficit based, and it also revolves around othering.
Yeah.
And I've had so many conversations with white people who feel like, I don't know what to do. Like, what do I do to help, justice or whatever, however they term it at the time, or fight racism? And I'm like, just do me like you do everybody else. Like, do me like you would do a white person, like, I have to mention when Yodit was mischaracterized in that article by an unnamed, will remain unnamed local outlet, media outlet, and news outlet, which is what we have. It was at first glance, it was like maybe they didn't know better or whatever else. When I looked at it, I said, oh, well, maybe they just were mixed up or something. But then I'm like, well, I know Yodit and how she's very particular about her words and very particular about like shoving you with a bunch of like exactness. like you're not gonna come away and have it, be that unsure. And so I looked at some of the other articles. I sat up the other night to like 3:00 in the morning, and I thought it was interesting that articles, some of the articles are about so-called hot topic subjects. Like one was, what was the name of it? Behind Enemy Lines. What's it like to be a Trump supporter in liberal in Ann Arbor? And there was so much tenderness in this article, and they used facts and figures, and they had a welcoming approach so that these these people were not victimized by sharing their truth. And this is a week after we saw an insurrection by some of these same folks where they kicked in the whole Capitol building and beat people within an inch of their life. And still that this same outfit was able to stay true to being having humanity for the people who had these different views. They had background. They made the people likable. I wanted to go have a sandwich with the one lady before I had to remind myself, no, she don't like you. Like, it's just really interesting how they can if they want to. So the choice is being consciously or is being made to mischaracterize. And Orlando, I know you had mentioned about how it's not just the journalists, and so did Yodit, about it being systemic, and it's a systemic choice to mischaracterize and have this deficit-based narrative. The word oppression, I don't think it came out of Yodit. Did that come out your mouth in that way?
No.
You know what I'm saying? The word oppress is a trigger word. So when I used to do online news gathering, and when I first started, there was something called trigger words. They constantly have trigger words. Like there's words you can't say without being under surveillance. Like if you say the word B-O-M-B, right, online too much, you're under surveillance. Like there's certain words. Oppression is going to evoke a certain emotion. And it was what we saw. What was it, 1,000 comments? Of people just tearing into her. That could not only could have been avoided, or let's have a group discussion about how it could be avoided. It should be accountability there, because it was a choice.
So talk about privilege. I had an opportunity to call and meet with the journalist and the editor, right, to express my disappointment with the mischaracterization of me and of New. But you have all had experiences, and in your work, taken some sense of responsibility with a particular approach. It was clear to me that this young reporter who interviewed me had no idea really to speak of what my work was or what I was talking about. It became even more evident to me that there was nobody who looked like me in that editorial room, nobody who looked like me writing stories for this outlet, no one who had had a similar or akin lived experience at that place at all. Otherwise, somebody would have said, hold up, right? And things like, oh, we only have, 700 characters or 700 words, or the reason why I was contacted was because we want to feature Black leaders in the community, right? And yet you reduced me to an Ypsilanti woman leading an effort. And you said something that really broke through for me about how media will turn a systemic issue into a single story. I'd love for you to talk about that, and then I'd love the both of you, Orlando, you as well. Like, what are you doing? What are you seeing and doing differently? And Alex, from the onset with your work, you've been really thoughtful about narrative and about how you present and how you center the communities you speak of and work in. Leslue.
So I have to stop and start with certain books because they just get me all riled up. So when I'm reading Cass, it's a beautifully written book. I love Isabel Wilkerson. However, it's a lot. And so one of the things she mentions is how at different times the narrative changes. So in order to put together atrocities or to exercise atrocities, a lot of times there's a need to single out a person, and other times to make everybody one. And it moves upon whatever the goal is. So we take about Nazi Germany. It was important for the first thing they did was take away anything that made you you. So we shaved hair, we shaved mustache, beard, sideburns, anything that would make you what you call yourself, right? So everybody looked the same. They're in the same outfit, everything. So if they mass killed 100 people that day, they could still go home and have a ham sandwich, and it didn't stick with them the same way, because it wasn't like killing an individual. And if you stood up as an individual, then you would be, acted upon accordingly. And other times it's used as an excuse. So to take real facts and figures about the systemic issues in Washtenaw County and history would, in order for someone to feel oppressed, that means that there has to be an oppressor, whether that's an organization or a person or something intentional. And so to deflect accountability, it's easier to say that this one person has this one opinion that there is systemic oppression. And so let's delve into this one person work as opposed to all the voices that she's representing or the realities that she's representing.
Hey, Yodit, to answer your question, I think the media, the term I say the establishment media or the commercial press, commercial media, I mean, it's interested in views and clicks and the individualizing those stories and making them as, the flashing red light, the shiny object, the thing that's going to get the attention. That's much easier than taking a bigger picture, systematic approach to informing people about what's going on. Locally, just within 24 hours of George Floyd's murder, we had an incident in Ypsilanti Township here. That story was talked about within the media. For some reason, the mayor of the Ypsilanti city and some city council people, no one in that commercial press questioned the Ypsilanti Township government officials who negotiate the contract with the sheriff's department. No, there wasn't talk about, in that criminal justice perspective, Ypsilanti Township, its court is 14B, and that court is funded, 86% of its funding is from costs and fines, which is completely out of step with some more affluent areas like like Ann Arbor, where it's between 40 and 60%. And when Leslue was saying earlier, it was like, treat me like, it's somebody else, just like I'm anyone else. I'm not asking anything special, just be normal. I don't think those disparities and that system that's in place in Ypsi Township, I don't think of Barton Hills, it wouldn't be stood for. These disparities in health and education and criminal justice, if they were in wealthier areas, they absolutely would not be tolerated. And democracy is rule of the people, not property owners or how much money you have. So it's holding those communities to the same standards as you would for your own or what you expect others, and also those government officials. And by media focusing in on that most exciting stories, you don't get that conversation or that perspective.
Thank you, Alex. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, no, you go ahead.
No, you go ahead, and then I want to just pipe in with a question.
Okay, to Yodit's question about approach, Stephen Henderson set out to start a newsroom that was reflective of the demographic makeup of the city of Detroit. So we are a majority Black and Hispanic newsrooms. The model is also different. We're a newsroom on a mission. Our model is for us to engage Detroiters in a continual and iterative process whereby we hear about their Detroit experience, what their information gaps are, what their priorities are, and then we leverage our journalistic prowess to provide solution answers, accountability, journalism, and what we publish. And so we're not a newsroom that's making up or thinking up what we deem to be important, but we are allowing Detroiters to tell us what is important to them. And we just released our first progress report that amplifies some of the priorities, things like housing stability, stuff the mayor didn't talk about last night about housing stability and property tax foreclosures, about transparency and neighborhood development, even, COVID-19 concerns and, other things that were just sort of missed that he may have just grazed over last night. And so that approach is a different one. It is an approach that will make the white dominant industry uncomfortable, because we are not so concerned with being objective, which is a relatively new tenet to journalism that came in the 20th century. An objective meaning, can like the average middle country white person digest this and understand it. Objectivity has been used as a weapon to silence Black dissent and Black voices, and we don't subscribe to it. We know what we bring to the table as Detroiters, and so we're speaking as Detroiters. Everybody is from Detroit. Ain't nobody. That's the other thing too. After we tell these stories, we got to go home to our neighbors. We got to go back to the block. And so there's a level of accountability that a lot of the folks at the dailies don't have. The last thing, the very last thing that I would say about this approach is that there is accountability at every tier. So we have Black reporters; those are the front-facing people. We have a Black C-suite where our editor, our news director, our director of engagement, and our executive editor are all people of color. And so it's not enough to have just Black reporters, but you need Black executives, you need Black copy editors and editors, you need Black managers and assignment editors as well at every level. And I think in Yodit's case, what happened with that MLive article is that just wasn't the case. That wasn't the case. There was no check. There was no Black person who gets it in line to say, y'all got this wrong. That's the biggest online site in Michigan, right? Thousands upon thousands of people were going to see that. And there was no thought on part of the editorial staff to say, this is a Black woman talking about her community, her work, her battle and fight against systemic racism and the amplification of Black thought, Black leadership. We need to make sure that we get this right. There was no thought. And so there is an arrogance that takes place in these newsrooms. And yes, metrics are key performance indicators. Metrics are how long people stay on the site. Metrics are how many clicks can it get, but not at the expense, and it should not be at the expense of fidelity and truth. And that is why we are trying to force a reckoning in this industry. I don't think it's happened yet. I think we're getting there when we talk about media and print media and digital media. We're getting there, but it's not there yet because stuff like that is still happening.
Exactly.
Orlando, I want to return us back to something you lifted up at the very beginning of this conversation, which was a desire to honor your grandmother's stories, your family's stories. And I want to return us to the core of centering justice too, which is imagining and envisioning what a world would look like in which we did honor the dignity of people and their stories. What would it feel like? What would it look like? So before we shift into demands, I want to offer that question.
Yeah, I'll just say really quickly, it will look like me having public record of who we are, who my family is, and where my family comes from, right? One of the most important sections in the printed newspaper is the obit section, the obituary section, right? We weren't given the privilege of having our short life stories printed, right? And so we have to go on these quests to figure out who we are. And so in a world that is just, I will be able, just like my white European counterparts, to be able to tell you which African country we come from, what tribe, what year did my folks come to these shores, where in the Delta of Mississippi, because you can't even find Comida, Mississippi on a map. All of that, I can't. So we have to go on our own journeys and spend money to figure out who we are and, you know, how we show up in the world today. And, you know, it is worth it, but it is a journey. I come from a family that's steeped, you know, like in the church, but I recently on my ancestry journey found out who my great grandfather was, born in 1882. And he had the gall and audacity to put minister on his 1920 census form as a Black man, and everybody else on there who were Black said farmer or sharecropper, right? My great granddaddy said, nah, this is who I am. And he took power in his own narrative, even in that census form. And so I think what would be just is for everybody to be able to go back to figure out who their families were and how that shows up in who they are today.
I love that. Thanks, Orlando. The birth and death thing is a big deal too, and the census, and until that truth and that, you said, public record of who we are, until that's righted, I think everything, you know, that's the foundation. That's how you know, some people, and everybody can't be doing the same thing. That's the other thing, like the diversity in assignment. You know, some people can be looking at justice in healthcare, justice in medical disparities or whatever. But when I think about media, a lot of what's considered truth does come from birth, death, census, especially when we're talking about history, and it's historically inaccurate. You know, I found a census record of when my grandmother was maybe 4 years old. No, she was 9 years old. And she said, who are those people? There were two little boys on there. And I said, I read it out to her, and she said, oh, that was the neighbor's sons. So they would actually just take whoever was at the household and they would put that on the census, you know. So that kind of inaccuracy, you know, burns us, and then us not being able to define. So it's only, I think, I could be right, I think it's 1965 when you got to have influence of what they put on your birth certificate. So like I have an old coworker who was born in the early 60s, and she's her and two brothers. And her mother is of Native and Black ancestry, and her dad is Puerto Rican. And so one of the children was named Hispanic, one was Black, and one was white. And it only had to do with how they came out and how they looked at the time of birth. And the nurse got to have that much jurisdiction over that person's life and history and record.
You know, I think there's an expression we probably heard before when the American economy catches a cold, Black America catches pneumonia. And I think of in difficult times and stressful times, challenge times, the most vulnerable, the most exposed. And we're seeing it when the state looks at Washtenaw County, they look at us as a wealthy county, and you know, east of 23 suffers for that. When the county looks at the vulnerable areas, they may look at zip codes. 48198 has a good section of Superior Township that would like to call itself Ann Arbor. Ypsi Township has an affluent area and it's 48197, and that shares a zip code with Ypsi City. So when it's looked at from the county and that zip code, the most vulnerable suffers again. So I'm thinking with all that, in a more just way of shaping a narrative, in an authentic way of shaping a narrative, those individuals and communities inform or create the story. They have to inform or create the story. We should be suspicious of any story that's not, authentic and come from or informed by those people that it's about. And when we think about M Live, we've seen, and I don't want to just bash them. I want, but I want to look at them as what they do. I mean, they compile a bunch of information and spit out some stories in a 24-hour cycle. I just don't have the biggest expectations for them, but they can cause, they're looked at, as Orlando said, it's M Live, the largest, one of the most largest journalism sources. They have such incredible impact, but for people serious about what's going on, if you're interested, you can't look at M Live. And I don't want to minimize your story, Odie, what it happened in that at all, because I mean, the misquotes and things that I've heard, and a link that I put in, their fourth most popular story in 2019 was about modern day segregation in West Willow and Ypsilanti Township, and they were trying to write a favorable story, and they referred to our neighborhood as essentially a public housing complex, and that was extremely offensive. And also in that story, I was interviewed for an hour and got one sentence about seeing trash when I returned to the community. So just a view on not just M Live, but our media sources, it's really limited. We need authentic stories from the people that they're about.
I think that's so true. And to be clear, I've seen this happen in almost every major publication, so while that experience was my own, I know that it represents what folks have experienced all over this country and the world. And I think it was you, Orlando, that said mainstream media upholds white supremacy. And I feel like that's what we saw. On a different note, as we transition to your demands, you all, the greatest gift my father gave me was the story of my lineage, that I know that I am a descendant of the Queen of Sheba. So can't nobody tell me who I am, right? But it was disappointing to me because there's a lot of consequences when you mischaracterize, particularly Black and Brown leaders. There's a lot of consequences that we face. And so narrative is important. It's important how you talk about the constituents you work with or the communities that you work with. When I went to Ethiopia, somebody asked me, what was it like? And the best way I could characterize it, and this is a gift, yeah, Kabila, and this is a gift to Black and Brown folks here, is that our story does not begin with pain. It does not begin with pain. And so even if you can't figure out your ancestry because of the terrorism of enslavement, know that my father is from the birthplace of civilization. Every person walking this earth and that ever existed came from that continent. We are the birthers of humanity, and we deserve to have our humanity upheld. Now with that, what do we want to ask of our community, you all? What are your demands?
No one wants to follow you, D. Johnson. Who wants to follow you? Who wants to do that? Right. Asante kind of just said she dropped the mic. She sure did. Listen, I'll go first and I'll be quick. I want to call in folks to this. Our friend and brother who had succumbed to COVID last year, Marlo Stoudemire, used to say this all the time to me in private, but also in public forums. He used to say, to white folks, I don't need your empathy. I don't need your tears. I need your hands. Roll up your sleeves and work. So I challenge folks to develop a work ethic coupled with curiosity and a yearning for learning. challenge folks to develop a healthy respect for, this social justice ecosystem and everybody's role, and to respect the roles and tactics that are different from yours, because we need everybody. Apply curiosity, apply a yearning for learning before you apply judgment.
Yeah, I think in the Black Women's Forum that you'd done earlier with, it was just so powerful. Dr. Joanne Watson, Victoria Burton Harris, Robin McCoy, and Laura Coddington. But I think in that, someone had mentioned Fred Hampton. And Fred Hampton, for people that don't recognize his name, was just a brilliant organizer, an orator, Black Panther that was murdered by the Chicago police. In his oration and organizing, he always was clear to paint the struggle in terms of class and that shared struggle that we have with the Spanish-speaking people, the Spanish-speaking community, working class whites, all together, people, the vulnerable populations together, and it's a class issue. And I just think looking in a local context here, we can get so passionate in our disparate groups and lose sight of the big picture. So I really think we need to understand we have some common systems that we want to dismantle, and they're rooted in that class struggle. So let's look at it from that perspective.
I agree, Alex, and to continue that, in my mind, we were just thinking the same thing. It's really important for me to think about, in order to kind of quiet one voice in the community. I'm often, because I feel like I ascribe to so many different communities, I'm also silencing a part of myself too, right? So because we're so interdependent on each other. So like yes, I'm Black and I'm all this, but I'm also a woman. And so like in the process of making changing the way that banks, let's just as example, changing the way that banks administrate loans and how we deal with economics would help everybody. Like in I was looking at a survey up here that Revalue Michigan did, and the percentage of funding to businesses with female founders is only 4% from banks, right? It's only 2% from venture capital, 3% from angel. The biggest amount comes from community. So, if we were to see that as like, we're going to dismantle the way, why do banks have so much power, when in reality, banks make the biggest, and I wish I will find it and send it to Nananya, but banks get their biggest amount of revenue from poor people, from overdrafts, from checking amounts. I pay, I'm not gonna say what I pay, but my first year of business, because I was like jumping in, bootstrapping, I didn't know what I was doing. I was always like overdrafting. When I went to that tax preparer, she was like, "Oh no, I think you made a mistake." I paid $1,500 in fees in 1 year. We're how they make their money, but we allow them to be not only make their money, but also decide who's eligible, who gets to have a business, what neighborhoods they can have it in. That needs to be dismantled. And that's not good. It might help me, it might not. It might help Black people, it might not, but it helps so many people. And in the powers that keep that structure in place are hurting themselves too. Like it might, maybe it's helping a certain white male of a certain age, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't have a wife or a sister or a granddaughter that would benefit from him jumping in Do you know what I'm saying?
Thank you, Leslue, and thank you, Orlando and Alex. We are so grateful for your wisdom today. And I just, before you all leave, want to make sure to share this survey. And if you can take a moment to complete that before you leave, we would really appreciate that. And then Yodit would like to offer a little invitation to you as you move on with your day.
I just want to name that we could have had this conversation for 3 more hours, right? And wow, it was so rich and cathartic, I think, for a lot of folks, and the intersections, right, of narrative and systems and policy and practice and how we tell stories and how we experience stories and how they shape our identities. I want to invite you, before you transition to your next thing, we're not going to do this now, but narrative is tied to our humanity. It's tied to who we are, to the story of how we are coming to be. We need to be seen and acknowledged, all of us, and we acknowledge that race and gender and these other constructs seek to separate us, right? To reduce us into a single identity. You are your best thing, as Mama Maya Angelou would say. And so in the chat is just a little affirmation writing. I just want to ask you to copy it, put it in your email or something. If you have a moment now before you transition to your next meeting or wherever you have to go, just take a moment to affirm you, to affirm the ancestors, the elders, your being, because truly you do matter and you do belong, at least in this moment, you belong right here where you are. I think I could say safely on behalf of Ananya and myself and our entire team, we're so grateful to our panelists. And we extend love and peace to all of you as well. And we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yodit, and
Thank you,
everybody,
everyone.
all y'all.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Orlando. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.